And welcome back, everybody. This is the Tom Sumner Program. A guest this hour. Well, as listeners know, we've been talking to some of the people that were elected and re-elected to positions in the most recent election and went back to work or went to work in Lansing after the first of the year, after the holiday. And one of those re-elected candidates is from, I believe it's the 39th District. He'll correct me if I'm wrong. Republican Ken Horn joins me by phone. Hi, Ken. Welcome back to the show.
Well, it's good to be back with you, Tom. Looking forward to a great 2019 year. We've got some new people we're working with in Lansing, and so far everybody is getting along, and it looks like hopefully we can keep the momentum going of everything that we've done.
Well, I want to talk about some of what's been done and some of what you think might come up in the year ahead. But did I get that right? Because I'm terrible about keeping track of the various districts and numbers. Is it the 39th district?
It's actually the 32nd, but nobody pays attention. If I say 32nd district, even senators don't know where that's at. It is all of Saginaw County, and if your listeners visualize a map in their head, and they're driving north on US 23. Everything in Genesee County west of 23. So you're talking Fenton Township, Linden, Gaines, Archstein, Flushing, Montrose.
Gotcha.
And then all up into Saginaw. And my hometown is Frankenmuth.
We were just in Frankenmuth, and we almost called you to join us. We did a show from the Bavarian Inn.
Yeah, I got a text from Andrea, and I was just out of town, and I couldn't be with you, but it's always great to have you guys in town.
Well, I had a chance to talk with Dorothy Zender for a little while before we did our political roundtable, and I'll tell you, 97 years old, still running the kitchen, and I wish I had the energy she had.
No, I'll tell you what, it's where I got my start in Frankenmuth, is working for Dorothy. And she is such a wonderful person, but I tell you what, she she knows her way around a kitchen. She has eyes in the back of her head. A lot of people don't know this, but she sees everything. If you make one mistake in the kitchen or on the floor with a customer, she sees it. She knows about it, and she is a really, really good person.
Well, and as long as we're parked here in Frankenmuth for a moment, might as well acknowledge the young kids that are going to be playing on Saturday Night Live coming up in a couple of weeks. Greta Van Fleet.
Yes,
that's kind of fun news.
It's very exciting for town, and we're going to have them over for a reunion. These kids were splashing around in our pool when they were just kids, and I tell you what, they're really good friends with my nephew Michael Crary, and in all of the fame that they've got in such a short period of time, none of that's gone to their heads. These kids haven't changed any. They're just genuine. They're nice. They play a kind of music that I don't necessarily listen to, but I was not. It's they are. It's just a beautiful story.
It really is. But I want to ask you about, because this week on the show we've been talking a lot with candidates, both Republicans and Democrats, some of the new people that are coming into the House, some of the people that are, were term limited out. We had Joe Graves on the show last week. And we got talking about lame duck and some of the things that happened in lame duck. Are you pretty comfortable with the actions that were taken during lame duck, or has that become kind of an abused process?
The bills passed that needed to pass, and the bills were vetoed that needed to be vetoed. I wrote a little piece at the beginning of the new year, just advice to freshman lawmakers, and one of those pieces of advice is that nothing good happens after midnight, and that goes for nightclubs as well as Capitol buildings. Good laws deserve to be aired in public. They need a lot of sunshine. it needs a lot of conversation, and a lot of things are flying. I had, all of my big things, my economic development bills that I've been working on for years were passed earlier in the year or the prior year. I had no stake really in lame duck, but it is what it is. A lot of people were concerned that we were really impacting some of the proposals that were on the ballot. None of that, especially Proposal 2 and 3, nothing could really happen without the vote of the people. Those are constitutional amendments. Nothing we could do except for some, implementation stuff, and some of the more controversial stuff was vetoed. So I feel comfortable that we ended up coming out of lame duck in fairly good shape.
There was one little bit of strategy that I think a lot of people thought was maybe a little less dignified than the usual procedure, and that was the wrestling match over the minimum wage bill that was headed for the ballot, and then it was passed, and it was kind of looked at as a strategy to pass it so that the legislature could continue to control it, and then ultimately change, or as some people would say, gut that initiative.
Well, it wasn't gutted, but because it risked a lawsuit. But really, the bottom line is there are three ways to put something on a ballot, and it's a citizens' initiative, a referendum, or a full constitutional amendment. The signatures that were gathered for minimum wage and for the for the paid sick leave,
right,
those were citizen initiatives. That means that you had I think 250,000 signatures that acted as any lawmaker writing a bill has to go through committee, has to be talked about by by the people, and then signed by the governor. And so when they do a citizens initiative, the legislature is given 40 days to either accept it, enact it, and then it becomes a statute just like any other law.
Right.
So if they wanted a constitutional amendment for it, they would have probably needed another 150 or another 100,000 signatures to get them to about 350 or so. But this was a citizens initiative, and what happened was we had our galleries filled with servers, waiters, and waitresses, and bartenders that were asking us to protect their tips. And that was a major change, and so there was really no cutting. And the minimum wage is going to be raised exactly like that proposal said. So it'll be by the year 2030, it'll be the minimum wage will be $12.05 an hour, which is exactly the same way that it was sent to us as the initiative. That's what people signed. And so there's no gutting other than saying the tip credit would stay in place.
And your background, of course, was in the restaurant business.
Yeah, exactly. And you were at Bavarian then. If that tip credit would have gone away, which is what the proposal suggested, it would have changed the culture of every restaurant in the state of Michigan. Bavarian Inn and Zender's wouldn't be the same restaurants that they are today. And so the waiters and waitresses there, they're required to be paid minimum wage. And so they'll be getting the same $12 an hour that everybody else gets, but they get a tip credit so that if their tips don't reach the $12, then the company has to pay the difference. I think there was a huge misunderstanding of what the tip credit actually does. But servers at Applebee's and Chili's and in Bagger Dave's and Bavarian Inn and Zender's, these people know what that's all about. They can sure they make $3 an hour or whatever it is, and in minimum wage, but they'll take home $100, $200, $300 a night in tips. they get screwed if this thing goes into place. So we were protecting the servers. This had nothing to do with, even with the restaurants themselves.
I want to move on to the election. Republicans hung on to a majority in both the House and the Senate in Lansing, but Democrats picked up seats in both, and of course, we've got a Democratic governor, attorney general, and secretary of state now. Was that the signal that Democrats like to say that it is? And how, being a Republican, how are you and other Republicans reacting, and what do you expect in the new year?
Well, we're hearing a lot from the new governor. Governor Whitmer is gone on record as talking about building bridges. That means working with the Republican legislature. She also has to deal with Washington, D.C., and, we've got the Healthy Michigan program, for example. 650,000 people have health care now that didn't have it before. That is 90% federal money. In order to maintain those programs properly and get all the waivers and make sure that the Medicaid program stays in place, she's also got to deal with Republican administration. And so there are more than one bridge that has to be built, and so I think we're going to get along well. She comes from the legislative history experience, and so she knows how to deal with legislators on both sides of the aisle. I just had a chance to get to meet the new Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist, and I think that we're all going to get along just fine. In my position, I was appointed to chair economic development and small business development. I'm chairing the appropriations committee for talent in education development, trying to fill that skilled trades gap. So I think I'm going to have in particular a lot of objectives and goals that are similar to the governor. So I think we're going to do just fine.
And might as well talk about the government shutdown because it's still going on. Why aren't Republicans in Washington blaring trumpets and saying, "Look, we're shrinking government. If these are non-essential personnel, why did we hire them in the first place?"
Well, I think a lot of that. A lot of those. We have Coast Guard, here in Michigan that are they're going unpaid. So I wouldn't call it all of those jobs necessarily non-essential, but it's about it's a small percentage of our total government that's actually shut down. It's really a partial shutdown. At some point it'll open up. If you think about it, Tom, last year we had a shutdown as well. Do you remember? The trigger point for reopening it?
I don't. I remember. I've seen these before.
That's the same. We had currently until we don't know how long it's going to go, but the longest shutdown we've had was I think back in 1995 when Bill Clinton was a president, and I bet you your listeners couldn't remember what negotiation opened up the government back then. These government shutdowns aren't as horrible as people think, and they are for the people that are laid off without pay, but they'll get their money back. I think when it reopens, they'll be reimbursed and back paid. And but it's kind of interesting to see what people consider compromise in Washington. Only one side is supposed to compromise in this whole thing, and so at some point they'll get together, they'll figure something out. I just saw an article this morning in some news journal that Cher is suggesting to Nancy Pelosi that just give him what he wants and open up the government. So who knows? It's going to be a cluster bang for a while.
Well, and the other thing too is all of this inflammatory language about a crisis at the Mexican border, and there really doesn't seem to be a real crisis. It's kind of a manufactured crisis, and I think a lot of people are starting to catch on and get a little annoyed with that.
Well, I don't know. I mean, that word crisis is, has been thrown around for a long time. I mean, I'm not sure how many people have lost their lives, to the global warming crisis that we had. If people agree that there may be something, is it a crisis? I don't know. We certainly do have an opioid crisis, and I think we can all agree on that. And
Sure.
90% of the opioids come, from that southern border. So, is there a crisis? If we just say there's an opioid crisis or there's human trafficking crisis, and we consider the things that are coming across the border that we have no control of, does it matter semantics? I don't know. It all depends on what your focus is and what your politics are. The same people that don't want, a border wall now supported border security, but we don't know what that means today as opposed to when we had a different president. So I think it's all politics right now and all posturing, and everybody's got a stake in this. So we'll see how it ends.
What do you think Lansing is going to be digging into in the next weeks and months?
Well, we're going to be our caucus met today just to talk about this exactly. And I tell you what, education, skilled trades, STEM education, filling a skill gap is really going to be our top priority for growth in Michigan. I mean, we don't have enough workers. Don't pick an industry, whether it's construction, manufacturing, medicine. We don't have enough nurses. We have a teacher shortage. We have a police a shortage of police officers, firefighters. There isn't a job sector that isn't facing some kind of a shortage. So we need to really deal with that and get young people educated into careers that they want to go into. Roads and bridges, we want to make sure we keep building those. And we want to make sure that we're on pace to fix all our roads within a 10-year period of time. Get them all up to snuff, and then the per capita spending for roads is going to have to be raised. I think we were number 50 at one point out of 50 states in terms of per capita road spending. That's how our roads deteriorated so much over decades. And then but what the absolute top priority by far and number one complaint call to my office is car insurance. And we talked about it the last time when I was on your show.
Right.
The cost of car insurance in Michigan.
One of the things that raised a few eyebrows was the passage of a bill. It appeared to move money from education to road funding, and both of those are hot-button issues.
That was after a court case called it was the Wayfair case. They called it this online company that sells a lot of stuff and internet stuff. So they are required now to collect and give to the state treasuries the sales tax on internet sales, and we figure about somewhere right around $300 million. And so we made a commitment to dedicate those dollars to environmental cleanup, brownfield cleanup, like in the cities, like Flint, will benefit greatly from that, and then into roads. And so that caused some consternation, but I got to tell you, school funding is at its highest. We're at $14.8 billion. Every time we see increases after all the work we've done over the past 8 years, we're seeing new dollars into the general fund or the school aid fund. But when we get to a quarterly revenue sharing report or a revenue report, and we're up to $500 million, education and roads are a priority. So schools are getting covered pretty well, and they will still be a top priority in the future. I plan to take a stronger role in education and in university and college finances, in this next term. So I know they're going to do just fine. It was right before the election and throughout the summer, Democrats were shaking their fists at Republican candidates who, because we needed more environmental cleanup. We need cleaner air and water, and we need to fix the damn roads. And then all of a sudden, when we do that, the complaints come that we're not spending enough money on schools, and so it all balances out just fine, and schools are going to do well.
Well, let me ask this: with all the money that goes to education, and with all the money that's being appropriated for roads, why do both still seem to be filled with potholes?
Well, we got
is it just
we didn't spend money, right? And then we've got all these proposals, pot for potholes, and we passed
right.
the proposal one, and all that tax revenue is going to fix our roads, and then when the money actually comes in, we all have our priorities. So it's going to be interesting to see how the governor reacts to all of this in her State of the State. It's going to be February 5th. She's delayed it, to make sure she's got all her appointments in place, and she gets her sea legs underneath her, and she is smart. She's a quick study, and when she does her State of the State, it'll be a clear sign of the direction she wants to go. And in the meantime, the Senate and the House will, kind of set the tone with budget proposals of their own. And I think we're gonna see that they're gonna be fairly similar.
More with Republican State Senator Ken Horn straight ahead. So, roads and education. What about some of the other areas, and maybe these are things where we could save some money and pick up a few bucks. Prison reform.
Yeah, we've done a lot of that, both on a state and federal level, and they're still talking about more things, out of Washington D.C. We're down from 50,000 inmates down to 40. Prison reform is working out pretty well. I voted no twice, I think 3 times on privatization of prisons. I voted no on the privatization of food service in prisons. We find out that our corrections officers are really doing a great job. The prison reform that we're doing now is not so much to save money, but to prepare our communities for the eventuality that people are going to get out of prison. Not everybody's in for a life sentence. And so most of these people are going to be coming home to our communities at some point. How are we going to train them for jobs so that our recidivism rate stays lower? They don't go back to prisons. How do we get them, engaged in the community and becoming good citizens, productive, tax-paying? That's really our challenge, and we've come a long way, so we have a lot of work to do.
Is there? It's really tough for. And I have a friend who works with ex-cons, and he always prefers that we call them returning citizens.
Yes.
In areas, and you know this because of the area that you represent, Ken, jobs are kind of at a premium, and it's very difficult for people with a prison record to compete for any kind of jobs, even what some people would call menial labor.
Yes. Yeah, and I've got a tour of Freeland, a facility coming up here, I think this week or next week, and I am going to go in there. We're going to visit the facility, look at the training that they're doing. They've got a great carpentry program inside of there. How are they preparing people to get back out on the street? You can't just, for a while, people were coming out, returning to our neighborhoods without Social Security cards without driver's license, no jobs. You can't just put a new suit on somebody, kick them out the gates, and expect them to have a great productive life in Michigan. So that's where I think you're right. I mean, your friend is right. We need to take care of the things that will get them integrated back into society, so that they don't so they don't go back into the system. That just costs us money, and it really, we can streamline the cost of being in prison, but health care costs and 24-hour care, all of those things, you can only save so much money. It's making sure that people don't get to prison, and then when they get, if they do make mistakes and then they come out, that they come back and they've learned their lessons and they're going to be all right.
Excuse me. One of the things that the governor has mentioned already, and we hear it a lot from candidates and newly elected officials, talk of transparency, and yet Michigan remains pretty far down the list, if not dead last, in terms of transparency, depending on which studies you read. Do you think that any sitting legislature would ever consider revoking the exemption from FOIA for the legislature and for the governor's office?
If there's, the devil's always going to be in the details, but I think that, we consider it. The House is looking at that. I think from Saginaw County, Representative Vanessa Guerra have been talking about this for some period of time. The thing I'd want to be really careful of is that conversations that I have, in fact, we just settled two cases in Genesee County dealing with Medicaid. These conversations are very confidential. How do we separate those things out? When I have a town hall meeting, people know about it. I do robocalls into a town.
Yeah.
I send letters to all the township officials, letting them know I'm going to be there. I open myself up. I come home every night. I'm not sure what somebody would FOIA out of my office that would be worth some of the concerns that they have. So I'd be willing to look at that, but I will not give up the confidence. Some of these are very sensitive private conversations that I have with constituents. They know that if they call my office or if they email me, they can trust that their conversations are private, and I want to make sure it stays that way.
I'm glad you mentioned the town hall meetings. How often are you able to do those, and how responsive are people to those? Do you get good turnouts?
And sometimes, it depends on the area, and sometimes it depends on the issues at hand. I've had town hall meetings. They're actually office hours, and if I have more than about 6 people show up, we just round table issues. We just sit around and shoot the breeze and talk about things that concern them. And if they come by with something sensitive, usually have a private room that
Gotcha.
That we can go off to the side and talk about their PA 116 tax credit, or about their VA is treating them or not responding to them in certain cases. Those kinds of things we can talk about privately. But I'll get anywhere from 6 to 100 people at one of these things, and then we just talk. And the things that come up are sometimes they're a sign of the times. School safety was really an issue after the shooting in Florida, and a lot of people talked about it. But it generally comes down to three things that we already mentioned: was education. What are my kids going to do when they grow up? Roads. How are we going to fix them properly? And then car insurance. Those come up perennial every month, and I'll have one. I think February 28th, I'll have one in the city of Saginaw, and then I'm moving down. I think the next one will be in Flushing, and then I end up back up in Saginaw County for the next month. So once a month, I do those for sure. But I'm in the district every day,
Well, Ken, we're just about out of time, and thanks so much for spending this time with me. It is always a pleasure to talk with you, and I want to make sure and say congratulations on your election and Happy New Year.
Well, same to you and to your listeners. And anytime you have an issue, Tom, you've got such a great show, and your listeners are tremendous. And you need to get a hold of me. You know how to do that.
I will. We'll talk again soon. Thanks so much.